So first of all, thank you very much to the meetBSD team for inviting me to open the conference. First of all, I think it's quite amazing. I mean, I understand that the speaker list is actually quite international. And I think when you look at the subject I want to talk about, which is kind of Krakow's emergence as a technology hub for Central and Eastern Europe, and even Europe in general, I think it's very relevant, because it's not just a question of Poland, even Poland within Central Europe, but a question of Poland and its place in the world. And if you think about competition, it's not Łódź, it's not Warsaw, it's not Prague, it's not Budapest. It's actually very international. It's Bombay, it's Shanghai, it's Johannesburg, these kinds of cities. So I think it's quite important to keep that in mind as we start to begin to understand why is it an interesting place at the end of the day. So first of all, my position right now is I'm the chairman for the High-Tech Committee for the American Chamber of Commerce in Poland, as well as the head of strategy and business development for Central and Eastern Europe for Cisco Systems. Just to give a little bit of context, and this is the breakdown of the agenda. I'll try to move very quickly because I know that we're a little behind on the time, but a little bit of a primer on myself. From K to K, from Kosciuszko to Krakow. So this is just a little bit of a background on myself. So actually, Kosciuszko, why? When I was 18, I went to West Point, the United States Military Academy at West Point. I was in the Army for a few years. But there's a garden at West Point that's called Kosciuszko's Garden. And he actually, when he was building West Point, he actually had a little garden where he grew tomatoes and potatoes and things of this nature. So first of all, that was my first, I would say, understanding of Poland, was that somebody was trying to build a garden on a rock. Somebody must love agriculture. So that was my first introduction to Poland when I was 18. And then when I got married, you can see here, we went to Rome with my wife, who's Polish. And we actually got to see John Paul II. So it was quite, and get blessed by him. So it was quite amazing. But that's my connection. So I've been living in Krakow for about 2.5 years now. My Polish is not very good, unfortunately, but I'm still working on that. My boys are actually much better than I am. But hopefully this will be something that's fixed by time. So first of all, again, let's put this in context. Why is Krakow interesting? I mean, obviously, we have a very international group that's come here today to basically hear some interesting things, but I think that fundamentally, Krakow is really emerging on the international scene. But it's a question of time, because things don't happen as quickly very often as we'd like. But as you can see, and we'll talk a little bit about timeline in a few minutes, we already have critical mass in Krakow with regards to high tech, as well as a lot of other areas as well. But for example, if you look at multinational R&D, we have Google, represented here quite ably, IBM, Motorola, Sabre, which you may not know of because it's not necessarily always on the front end, but actually underlying Travelocity, cheaptickets.com, a lot of the various travel websites, Sabre is the engine that runs almost the majority of these kinds of things. So when you're buying a ticket online or booking a hotel, generally speaking, this is actually coming to you via Sabre, and they've got over 850 people here in Krakow. So I think that's quite interesting. You can also look at a lot of other industries. Offshore BPO, very strong in Poland in general, but definitely in Krakow. Capgemini is very large here. You have a lot of other ones as well. IT services, and we'll talk a little bit about clusters in a few minutes, but IT services is another area that's emerging. Startups, and I'd say startups and R&D headquarters, back office. These are the two areas that I believe are the most exciting from my own personal perspective, watching the environment evolve over time, as well as I think for international players coming in, because it actually shows that not only is it a source of good labor at a competitive cost, but there's actually good ideas. And fundamentally, this is what differentiates you from, let's say, a lot of other locations across the globe, is the nature of the good ideas and the talent, the caliber of the talent that's actually available. So why Krakow overall, right? And this, as any business would look at it, you're looking for the return on investment. So first of all, you just have a large talent pool. If you look at across, and there'll be a slide later on talking about the number of students, but Krakow, generally speaking, and if you look at within a 100-kilometer area, including Katowice, it becomes even larger. Very large talent pool, a lot of students. I mean, Krakow has always been known as a student city in general. You have the low cost plus the stability of the European Union. So when you're a multinational, generally speaking, you're going to be looking globally at where you'd want to locate your talent, right? So low cost obviously is a factor, but if you look at Silicon Valley, how many people think that's the cheapest place to do business? So I used to live there. Everything is expensive. The food is expensive, the cost of living expenses, everything's expensive. However, it's still the core of the international high-tech scene. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the talent. So low cost is important, but it's not the driving criteria for a lot of multinationals, depending on the subset of the area of work that they're trying to do. And the stability of the European Union is also something that can't be discounted, because if you look at a lot of countries just on the edge of it, the risk between a country that's gone through the very rigorous attempts to align their laws, align their social and economy to the European Union requirements is very high. And that bar takes a lot of risk out of the investment for a multinational or for a startup company, because suddenly you know that you can actually rely on a set of expectations, and you can't be necessarily ripped off, or people aren't snooping on your data at the end of the day. Multilingual and educated workforce. I think there's two pieces of this. One of them is the actual local workforce, which is the actual people going to universities and learning different kinds of languages. I think 90% of the people that are going to university here actually learn English as well as other, potentially German, Russian, different kinds of languages. Even the more niche languages, I think Chinese is now becoming a very interesting language for people to learn as well. So you can see that that's kind of one angle with regards to the actual workforce coming out. But you also have the other angle where you have people moving here from around the world. And I think this is actually another trend. If you look at Silicon Valley, people think it's an American kind of thing. The reality is it's not the case. If you look around, 60% of the people are not from the States. You see a lot of people from Europe. You see a lot of people from China, from India, from Africa. It's very much a mixing pot. And I think that diversity is actually what often gives it its kind of mix that allows it to kind of really become a melting pot of ideas. And so Krakow traditionally has also been a tourist location. There's a lot of reasons why people want to visit here, the cultural capital of Poland. And if you look at that from an overall perspective, it also means it's quite attractive for people wanting to come here, whether it's from the European Union or whether it's from outside the European Union. You have a lot of people moving here, and again, that kind of feeds this idea factory, if you will. And again, it's a great place to live. I mean, I could have lived anywhere in Poland. I chose Krakow. There were a lot of factors for that. But I think most importantly was that I thought that, number one, from a cultural perspective, it has lots of elements that are very interesting for raising a family. I think that if you're single, the nightlife is actually quite fantastic, as lots of people tell me. I personally don't have a lot of experience in that, which fortunately, for my wife's sake. But in general, I think this is a big factor with regards to especially bringing younger folks that want to come out here, have a great job, but equally importantly, they want to have a great time when they're away from work. So this is also, I think, very important for bringing in the people that are right at the place of their lives where they want to do something completely different. So these are a bit of number slides, but I think it gives you some context with regards to the big picture of where Krakow is today and where I think it's going to go. So Krakow multinational employment. And this doesn't include, I would say, medium and small businesses. IT, so over 4,000 people working in the IT space. You can kind of see, these are kind of the other areas of focus for various kinds of business. You have a lot of accounting and finance. You have a lot of customer support. You have R&D. You have these kinds of things. If you look at the aggregate, it's over 16,000. This slide is about a year old. So actually, my understanding is that right now, it's more around, 14,000 on this slide, almost. Now it's over 16,000. And you see a lot of companies continuing to hire. And actually, during the downturn, the companies continued to hire as well. So anti-cyclically, you saw a lot of jobs being added here in the last 2 years in these various spaces. So I think that's quite interesting to take away. This is kind of a breakdown. Again, this is a little bit dated. It's about a year old. But basically, these are the major IT companies that are actually operating in Krakow. And again, from my perspective, the more important takeaway is, number one, how long did it take these companies to grow to this size? And number two, what are the areas of expertise that these guys are focused on? Because again, obviously we want these guys to grow, but also as the talent raises with regards to the people that these guys are employing, then you start to see sectors emerge with regards to core competencies. So I referred to earlier around the overall student population. So if you look at Krakow by itself, you've got around 200,000 students. However, in my particular example, if you look at San Francisco and you take a 100-kilometer radius around that, you have a lot of bedroom communities, including Silicon Valley, but also all the way going up north to Petaluma, Santa Rosa. You really have a very wide area. So people are commuting within 100 kilometers very easily. So while on the one hand, I think Krakow obviously has its own perspective. It doesn't want to necessarily be related with Katowice, and Katowice certainly also wants to kind of, and the agglomeration of Katowice wants to kind of define itself separate from Krakow. The reality is that because of the Autobahn and the ability to kind of travel today, there really is no boundary. I I mean, if you want to, actually know a number of people that live in Katowice and commute to Krakow, and I know a number of heads of companies that are actually based in Katowice, and they commute from Krakow. So you see a lot of movement back and forth at the end of the day. And so when you think about the student population, again, it's a very fluid dynamic. And so when you're, let's say, a multinational looking at Poland, then if you look at agglomerations, this number actually stands out. The Krakow plus Katowice student population actually exceeds that of Warsaw. So I think it's an interesting point, both for, again, multinationals, but also if you're a startup company, because you obviously want to find really good talent. The larger the pool of candidates, the better opportunities you'll have to find the right people you're looking for. Another factor, and this is always a moving target, but this is basically the dynamics of trend over the course of time. And so if you look at population specifically, Warsaw obviously has continued to grow because it's the capital city. Krakow is actually the second fastest growing city in Poland. You have a number of cities, unfortunately, in Poland that are actually decreasing in population. For example, Łódź used to be the second largest city and is now kind of moving down the charts. Szczecin is another city which is kind of slowly moving down the charts in terms of losing population, unfortunately. Some of those people are moving overseas, some of those people are moving to bigger cities, but this is also very important from a labor trending perspective. So this is a bit of a busier slide, but it actually talks a lot around the evolution of Krakow from a high-tech perspective, as well as some of the other definite overall areas. So I would actually recommend you look specifically at Sabre, because I like them as a data point with regards to growth, because it shows that they unintentionally grew much faster than anyone could have expected. And I think that's a fundamental thing, because very often I've talked to a number of heads of multinationals, and they said, we just started with 20 or 30 people in Krakow, and next thing you know, we had several hundred. And they didn't expect it. It was because of the quality of the talent and how they were able to deliver value. And I think that's a very fundamental point. So obviously, 1989, you have the emergence from communism. 1998, the first people that actually really got the ball rolling in Krakow was Motorola. So they were actually originally housed, and I don't know how many of you know Krakow very well, but my understanding is they were originally housed in a tower on a hill that's facing the Wisła. So, I mean, quite amazing story. Now they actually have multiple locations in different parts of Krakow, but I think that's quite interesting. And again, look at 2002, you basically have Sabre purchase a company called Gradient. So at that point in time, Sabre had a grand total of 6 people, 2002. So fast forward to 2004, Poland joins the European Union, and Sabre now reaches 100 engineers. So in the course of basically 2002, 2004, 2 years, you suddenly had basically almost 100 people added to the organization. Pretty significant. Move forward another 2 years, Sabre now has 340 engineers. So again, that's 3 times the number of people over the course of 2 years. Then we go to 2007. Actually, let's go to 2005 first. So IBM, I think following the trend, actually opens their R&D software laboratory, which now is around, I think, 350. So, and they're actually working on extremely cutting-edge stuff. I mean, I work for Cisco. We have a very close relationship with IBM in certain areas, especially with Tivoli software. That's actually one of the things that they're developing here in Krakow, as well as Rational and Eclipse software as well. So very focused on the software side of the house, which again shows one of the strengths of Krakow is the software space. And then 2007, Google opens their offices, their European R&D centers, and Sabre is at 600 people. So that's 2007. Fast forward now to 2010. So Sabre's at around 850 people today. And so you can see that they went from 6 people in 2002, roughly, 2010, 850 people. So you can see the emergence of basically and how fast, and that was never by intent. It wasn't like there were some guys in a back room in the office going, let's put 1,000 people in Krakow over the course of 10 years. That was never the actual plan, at least from my understanding. It basically kept happening, and the business justifications kept occurring from year to year. And so the growth basically aligned with the growth of the company, but also the opportunities as a result of the talent that were actually in Krakow. And there's a number of companies. IBM actually followed a very similar trajectory where they actually purchased a company locally, and then you saw the growth rise along that, both in the R&D space, but also in their finance and accounting space. So let's talk about the trends. So that's a lot of information at the macro level, but what does it mean at the micro level? And what does it mean if I'm a startup company? Let's say I'm a guy, I'm 22 years old, and I'm thinking about doing a startup company. What space should I do that in? Well, if you look at the trends from a technology perspective, what we see happening in Krakow, this is one of them. I think the mobile space is definitely an area where we're starting to see a lot of momentum. And again, we can thank Motorola to a large extent, because frankly speaking, they were the first ones in Krakow to kind of take the big bet. And ultimately, this is the space that they were very much operating in. And so, again, they were the first ones on the ground, but then you see a lot of other companies now coming down this space. I think just down the road, there's a big building, Eric Paul. They just built it here in the Special Economic Zone. So again, another one based off of the, basically working with Ericsson. Google, obviously. We have Volantis and iLoop. And these are two very interesting points, and especially because they have a very close tie to one another in a sense. Volantis is another company that basically it was initially a startup based in the UK, and they do all their R&D here in Krakow. And this is a theme that I'm starting to see very often the case. And the next slide will talk about that. But I think this is also very important to see, because obviously from, let's say, a marketing perspective of hitting a target demographic with regards to audience, very often you'll have a headquarters in San Jose or headquarters in London, because you can actually that way talk to a lot of your customers. But where do you want to put your talent? Do you want to put in a location where you have a lot of excellent talent, but you also have very high costs, or how do you balance that medium point? And that's where I think both Volantis as well as iLoop Mobile, both of them were actually started by a guy named Matthew Harris, who's based in Silicon Valley. And Volantis he did about 10 years ago, and iLoop Mobile he started here about a year and a half ago. And the interesting thing for me is that he did it once, and he liked it enough that he came back and he did it again. So I think that shows that, and he's kind of a serial entrepreneur, so he's actually started a number of different companies. So again, if you're the entrepreneur, looking at where you want to do a space, if you have talent, you have a cluster, so that means you have a lot of technology as well as the people that understand that technology. It's very interesting to see this evolution, and hopefully we'll see more of these kind of startups coming up around here in Krakow. And again, the other trend is actually this idea that you have your headquarters in one location, but your R&D is actually happening in Krakow. And so for me, this is actually a bit of a wake-up call, because I didn't realize it until I started to do research, until I started talking to a lot of people. I began to discover that there's actually not a real connection. These people generally discovered Krakow on their own. It wasn't like there was a marketing campaign or there was some kind of directed approaches to various companies or different countries. These are all very small companies that basically decided to come here by themselves. But the trend is that you're actually not only seeing Europeans taking advantage of it, and there's actually this kind of Scandinavian connection there. You have Norway and Denmark with a couple of companies, but you also have some from Israel, from the United States. And again, that means that these people are actually seeing the benefits of being able to set up operations in Krakow that can actually serve their home market. And if you look at the US ones, that's a 9-hour time difference. And so this is something that I definitely think is a very good momentum and trend within Krakow. And hopefully we'll start to see that kind of pick itself up over time as the visibility of what's going on within Krakow is going on, as well as maybe getting the visibility of Krakow up there along with the Bangalores of the world or the Shanghais of the world that are actually very visible, primarily because they have really big populations and home country markets. But I think the talent piece is the most fundamental thing, is with regards to actually having the talent and the large enough talent pool, but equally important is actually showing that the talent is being used in such a way that it's maximizing the potential, which is in the case of multinationals, in the case of startup companies or medium-sized companies doing back office R&D. So these are actually extracted not from the companies themselves, but from the press. So you can look at it in the Christian Science Monitor. One of the points that when their interviews with Google, they were talking about the fact that the deep grounding in mathematics. And I think, again, when you tie that to the large population of students and the specific skill set that often, and you see very often a lot of excellent performance of Polish universities in international coding competitions. And I think this is fundamentally tied back to the core competencies. IBM is another one that basically talked about how Krakow was actually competitive despite Bangalore's low costs. And this is something that you should really keep coming back to, because very often, and certainly within my company and many other companies, people are always trying to kind of balance the difference between cost and quality. And I think the fact that many multinationals are making that differentiation and choosing Krakow shows that it's not just about the labor costs. It's actually also about what the efficiency and the productivity of each of the people you have on your team looks like. And another interesting point, since 2002, IBM has actually boosted its staff in Krakow by 10. So that's quite significant. And from a language perspective, which is maybe more on the BPO, the business process outsourcing side of the house, 25 languages supported by Capgemini. So again, that's both people that are Poles that know the languages outside of Poland, as well as people that they brought in from everywhere else. So again, it's becoming very cosmopolitan, which also fits into if you have global aspirations with a startup company or your small or medium-sized company, then suddenly you have access to talent that's not just from the local area, but actually from around the world. This is a bit of a breakdown, I think, in more detail with regards to the actual Krakow as a university city. Obviously, over 200,000 students. A lot of people are actually graduating out of it. More breakdown with regards to the actual IT space, mechanical engineers. And if you're from Poland, I think the names of the universities are pretty well known to you. If you're not from Poland, Jagiellonian is like 600 years old, probably the most prestigious in Poland. AGH, I think, is a very strong up-and-comer as well. Hopefully I'm not getting censored because we're at a Jagiellonian facility, but AGH has, I think, another strong contender as well from an overall perspective, very well received in the business market as well for being very high, good technology education, and a number of other universities as well doing technology education. And this is more the soft side, right? The cultural piece. So while you can go to the Rynek at like midnight and see it packed with people, I think that the fact that a lot of globally renowned news agencies have actually also had articles talking about just how amazing Bohemian. I don't know if the people in Bohemia would appreciate that, but basically that's the fact that it's a very exciting place to be, I think, is quite important. The fact that the entire Old Town, and I'm sure that a lot of folks that are actually traveling here just for the weekend should definitely walk around the Old Town and get a feel for it, because I think that in many ways it's quite unique. So I think that's actually another factor in wanting to come here. The fact that you have 7 million people plus coming here a year shows that it's a very interesting place. And so not even just for visiting, but also for living. So I mean, all those amenities are actually going on all year round. So it's also quite nice to live. The infrastructure, I think it never moves quickly enough with regards to how fast it's developed. But certainly, it's actually moving faster than anyone would have expected it. And so right now, you have a lot of construction going on everywhere. But really, the evolution of this has been quite fast. And I think that it's only going to get better over time. And frankly speaking, you have a lot of national parks. Within 15 minutes, you have a national park, Ojców, just to the north of Krakow. And to the south, you have the mountains. So you have, within an hour and a half, you have great skiing. So again, if you look at Silicon Valley, that's one of the other factors is the fact that it's also fun because you have San Francisco very close. You have the ocean. And in their case, you also have the mountains quite close. And the quality of life is a big factor with attracting kind of very high-quality young talent that wants to live there. This may not be as important for certain size companies, but certainly for multinationals it's of interest. But basically the fact that there's a lot of subsidies that are out there. I think there's EU subsidies at one level. There's Poland subsidies. And I know that in the case of Małopolska, they also have another layer of subsidies for startup companies, as an example. So there's different kinds of money that's out there. There's also venture capital. There's the VC, the first VC in Krakow. His name is Rafał Szczycin, and he actually started operations in 1998, and he's still running. He's had a couple of I think good sells in terms of his businesses, and he's still out there. So we have venture capital out there. Angel funding is also starting to find its way out here as well. So if you're a startup company or a medium-sized company looking for different kinds of funds, that's one avenue. I think New Connect via the Warsaw Stock Exchange is another avenue as well. So there's definitely money that's out there. So that's it. I think I'm just a few minutes over, but the last slide is actually the culmination. Actually, last year around this same weekend, we actually had a signing ceremony for a sister city agreement between San Francisco and Krakow. And actually, this weekend is they're going to be having a lot of the 4th of July, which in the United States is Independence Day, so it's a quite big holiday celebration. But they're actually celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Sister City Agreement. And of course, we're using that very heavily to kind of tie into the Silicon Valley crowd as well. So with that, thank you very much for being an attentive audience, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Cheers.